I would like to introduce our second speaker. Um, we will hear from Karen Sachse, who lives outside of Washington, D.C. She has over 40 years experience as an oncology nurse, most of her time spent with pediatric patients, holding both inpatient and outpatient positions. In 2010, Karen was diagnosed with bladder cancer. She became involved with BCAN first as a walk team captain and then as a patient advocate. She participated in one of the first patient empowerment through engagement research trainings, which has led to other advocacy positions. Karen has worked with the non-muscle invasive bladder cancer patient endpoints working groups led by Drs. Steinberg and Hahn. 4 years ago, Karen became the caregiver to her husband, Roger, who was then diagnosed himself with bladder cancer. Given her unique perspectives as healthcare provider, patient, and caregiver, she welcomes opportunities to share her story to raise awareness for bladder cancer. Karen, we're ready for you to give us some information.
Okay, go ahead.
And Karen, you should have the mouse.
Thank you so much, Nancy.
You're welcome.
Karen, you should be able to advance the slides now. If you want to try it, if not, I'll do it for you. Just go ahead and click on the picture and click enter. There you go.
Oh, there we go. Okay, perfect. Thanks. Thanks for such a nice introduction, Nancy. Just a little bit more about my story. I had 2 years of recurrent urinary tract infection and had blood in my urine and was mistaken for a gynecologic issue. Pretty typical for a lot of women that are diagnosed with bladder cancer. I was diagnosed by a community urologist. But then after 2 courses of BCG and my disease decided it wanted to move up into my lower tract, I moved my care to Johns Hopkins, which of course, as everyone knows, is an NCI designated center. I was then treated with mitomycin and have had 3 isolated recurrences. Last one was in 2014. And as Nancy mentioned, in 2016, shocks, my husband was diagnosed with muscle invasive bladder cancer and went through chemotherapy, a cystectomy, and then 4 months after his surgery, he developed central nervous system metastasis and died from that 15 months after diagnosis. So my involvement with pharmaceutical industry through for BCAN actually started back when I attended the very first BCAN summit. I attended that with my husband in 2016. He actually had just finished his neoadjuvant chemotherapy, and we decided to, since the first meeting then, the one in 2016 was up in Baltimore, wasn't too far for us. We decided to make the trip, and we're so happy that we did. My husband really was very passionate about the mission of BCAN, and we both came home very excited about patient advocacy. At the time, I was employed as a nurse educator for a pharmaceutical company that makes a chemotherapy drug for acute lymphocytic leukemia. And I knew that the patient stories are just very powerful. From years of setting up orientation and trainings for nurses at the hospital, I could talk all I wanted about side effects from particular chemotherapy drug, but when a patient got up there and spoke about it, that's when really the nurses keyed in, and that's what made them remember the side effects. So Merck, many of you know, is a very large pharmaceutical company. They contacted BCAN looking for volunteers for an unbranded project, and by that it means that the brand of the drug is not spoken about, so that it's a very fair and balanced presentation of just generic drugs, and sometimes no drugs are mentioned at all, just talking about a disease process. And I had signed up at the summit to volunteer, to be contacted. And so Merck's public relations company asked me to submit a letter stating that I was writing this letter to somebody that was newly diagnosed, and what did I wish, what did I wish I had known at the very beginning of my diagnosis. And so the program, the project, ended up being called With Love Me. It was launched in 2019, a collection of stories, really, from those affected by different types of cancer, patients and caregivers, written to their younger self. It involved many different types of cancer. It was an extension of an already established patient site called Your Cancer Game Plan, which featured Jim Kelly, who many of you know is the Buffalo Bills Hall of Fame quarterback. But the really neat thing about this site is that they also have links to other resources, nutrition, education, emotional support. And, like on the bladder cancer section, BCAN is very prominently linked there. And so the topic was very similar to the letter, but as I said, you're writing it to your younger self. There was no discussion of specific treatment centers, providers, or drugs. And then all of us agreed to be videotaped reading our letter. So things that I was able to talk about, and these were truly the things that I wish that I had known, and to stay organized, to start a notebook or some type of organization system, and keep asking questions, find a support group. Cancer can be so lonely. The people that really, really understand are the people that have gone that journey with you. BCAN, I'm so excited to be able to talk about the support that that I got and that my husband Roger got through BCAN, through this whole process. Give yourself permission to ask for help and let family and friends know what you need. And so if you want to see what the, an example of the project, just go to withloveme.com. But as things that are important about bringing that patient voice to a pharmaceutical industry, I knew as an educator that they really, do have very few opportunities to hear from patients. So when companies started asking, I was very excited about participating and letting my voice be heard. They need the perspective, the patient perspective, as many of the things that Tim just went over, to design, more appropriate, patient-friendly clinical trials that, if blood needs to be taken twice a day, that's probably not going to work. And to be able to inform the company of what the patient and caregivers needs and wants, and how and when do you want to receive the information. Patients also, they want to hear from other patients. They don't necessarily want always to hear from their doctor or a company, a drug company. They want to hear from other patients. So other things that I've been able to do that came out of the With Love Me project was that I was able to participate in some national and local interviews, always representing BCAN and men and women, and with bladder cancer, and being a survivor and a caregiver, kind of the trifecta. I was able to present on a patient panel to nurses, my fellow colleagues at the Oncology Nursing Society national meeting. I've participated on an advisory board for another company, and through that have reviewed educational materials, really looking at them when they were drafted and being able to say, maybe put it this way or maybe put it that way, or, present it in, a different light. And most recently, I have participated with a company in orientation for their new employees. Again, that is something that the new employees, don't often get to hear, perspectives specifically right from the patients. So a couple things that you might want to think about if you have this opportunity, and of course I would encourage you to, if you're interested. One, is there compensation? And how will you, get to the meeting, the focus group? What are the accommodations? What topics should not be discussed? The pharmaceutical industry is very regulated, and there were a couple of times that I had spoken about a particular drug, and that was not something that was allowed. So I learned that pretty quickly. When we get to review the final product, will you get to look at the product along the way? At what point? My experience is that everything had been laid out, and they got back to me right away, and were able to let me review things before they, moved on to the next step. Find out how will your input be used. Will it be, written in on a website, in a publication? Will your picture be used? All those things you want to take into consideration, as well as who is your audience, and then what are the most up-to-date statistics on bladder cancer? You're out there speaking, to the public, to these pharmaceutical companies, and you want to be up on, is bladder cancer the, 7th most common in the U.S., or is it the 6th, or is it the 5th? And so BCAN, of course, can help with that, and they have helped me tremendously. So I really enjoyed my experience with the pharmaceutical companies. I've found it to be very rewarding, and they have really, looked to patient advocates to help them with some of the grassroots projects. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Karen. We really appreciate your sharing your personal experience along with your experience as a patient advocate. We'll now